Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to my podcast, Don't Get a Therapist Yet. And today I have a very special guest. His name is Rahim Thawer. He's a social worker, psychotherapist, author, and also a postgraduate teacher. Rahim, I don't know how you fit it all in, but a really, really warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's exciting to be here, and it's always
Hi.
nice to chat with somebody across the pond, to see what's similar, what's different. It's lovely when something I'm doing here resonates with somebody, in the UK. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. But the audience might not know who you are and what you've done. So can you just tell people a little bit more about yourself as an
Yeah,
introduction?
absolutely. So I'm born and raised in Toronto, in Canada. Background is South Asian Muslim.
Yeah.
My parents immigrated from East Africa in the 70s. And having lived most of my life in Toronto, I grew up in like a suburban enclave where even though I was in a big metropolitan city, it took me some time to really find my way out of the
Yeah.
suburb and figure out where my people were. And I talk about my story that way as
Mm.
part of my bio because
Yeah.
I think we don't just have identities, we have a process of identity development, and that is intertwined with our mental health, right? How we seek
Yeah.
safety, how we seek connection. So I'm queer. I did my undergraduate degree in psychology,
Yeah.
and I was thinking of actually going into counseling psychology as a
Mm.
master's program, but I didn't initially get accepted, and I was waitlisted for one program. And that year, between my undergrad and what then became grad school, I worked at the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention. And
Wow.
working in HIV, um, I something that was ethno-specific, something that was pretty queer. Um, it helped me really think about practicing with communities that I belong in. And I was interested in like the systemic structural determinants of health and perspectives. And social work, um, it's not that other programs don't talk about that, other disciplines, but social work
Mm.
centers that and focuses on that,
Mm.
because not everybody who's a social worker becomes a therapist. There's other roles they do. So I then did Masters of Social Work, the 2-year program at the University of Toronto. Um, and during my undergrad, I got a great chance to do an exchange program in Singapore. And then during my master's program, I did a short MSW internship in Melbourne. And so traveling has become part and parcel of how uh, both my careers developed and my identity and my
Yeah.
ideas have developed. At any rate, during the pandemic, I left my full-time job at a family health team in Toronto, and I moved to a city called Winnipeg in Manitoba, and began writing. I had some space. The rent was a bit cheaper. My isolation decreased because I left Toronto with a friend, and had this space to think about what I wanted to write, what I wanted to produce, and that's when the book proposals, the book contracts, the writing started to really, really take off. Um, the last couple of years, I've been here in Alabama. I I'm teaching here full time in the School of Social Work, um, and it's an interesting story. I it's a distance program, and it's a 3-year program. It's quick and intense. They're churning out scholar practitioners, so they're like, we want you to understand how research works. We want you to give it a try. We want you to publish a thing, but we're doing it on speed. Go, go, go. So the way it's set up, I didn't actually need to be here, but um, I found out then that they were only allowing people who were residents of the US to be eligible or to apply to the program. So then I thought, you know what? I'm going to apply to work here. So I applied to work, I moved here, and then I got accepted into the doctoral program. And the doctoral program is taking me in a slightly different direction. I'm still a clinical person, but I'm thinking more about organizational leadership.
Mm.
So that's me.
Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? Because you're a trained psychotherapist as well, aren't you?
Yes, yes. So my master's is in social work, and I'm a clinical social worker essentially. So yes,
Yeah.
I've been practicing psychotherapy for nearly 15 years.
Yeah, well, gosh, yeah. Sometimes the routes are different in where you are in America. So I think because I've had the honor and the privilege to read your book, and it's very clear that you are a therapist because you understand the tools very well, and the way you've sort of integrated the tools into a specific subject, I think has been really, really good. Um,
Thank
and I
you. That's
know.
an honor to hear from another a
Oh
practicing therapist.
yeah,
So thank you.
yeah, I loved it. And I want to say the name of the book is called The Mental Health Guide, Cis and Trans Queer Guys. That's the
Mhm.
name, isn't it? Hopefully I've
Yes,
said that correctly.
you did. You
Um,
did.
well, I want to honour it, and I think it's so needed as well, because it's an area which I think is underrepresented in the
Mhm,
therapy world, and I love your take on it as well. I think we're going to get into a bit more detail as to uh, why it works so well.
mhm.
Um, but my if it's okay to ask my first question, Rahim, are
Go
we?
ahead. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So my first question really is to perhaps if you could tell the audience a little bit more about the book you wrote, the Mental Health
Mhm,
Guide, um, the framework of the book. What do you mean about social and subcultural determinants of mental health?
yeah.
That's a good
Well,
one to start.
yeah, that is. So the framework I'm coming from is it's an adaptation of the
Mm,
concept of social determinants of health. So SDOH, that is a framework that is used and upheld by the World Health Organization, many countries that are looking at uh, the social and economic conditions that impact people's
yeah,
health outcomes, employment,
absolutely.
poverty, experiences of discrimination, precarity, migration, etc. Now, of course, if that affects your physical health, that affects your mental health. But I would say it's too broad, to say, uh, you know, we have to completely solve poverty before we can expect good mental health. And it's in some ways too simplistic because I think that while broad social determinants are going to impact your mental health outcomes, we also live in our own bubbles, our own worlds where we have the people we compare ourselves to and the communities and spaces where we learn norms about what's valued, right?
Mm,
And so I'm looking a lot at subcultural determinants. So
hmm.
for example, I think for queer guys, they're living in a straight world predominantly because they have
Yep,
to navigate that. They've been socialized by that world. So they've
yep.
internalized some of those messages. And then they come out and there's another subculture that has its own
Mm,
history, that has its own norms. And so I'm, you know, as I said, I started working in the HIV sector, and I recall like when we talked about queer men's relationships, when we talk about body image, when we talk about substance use, it always came back to how does this support people living with HIV or how does it support HIV prevention? And I thought that question says a lot about the funding framework, right? There's a public funding framework that supports crises and problems. And I think we need to be able to talk about substance use, relationships, body image, coming out, all of that stuff separate from HIV. I think sexual health and HIV is its own subcultural determinant of mental health outcomes, right? Like,
mm.
when did you receive your diagnosis? Do you experience stigma? Do you have access to prevention information and medication? This kind of thing. Uh,
Yeah.
And so each chapter of the book looks at one of the determinants of mental health outcomes. So I talk about internalized shame, which is like internalized
Yes.
depression, really. I talk about connection to family of origin,
Mm.
which can include spiritual and religious communities. I talk about sexual health. I talk about body image. The thing I wanted to emphasize, is that when it comes to a determinant of your mental health outcome, it's not about having something or not having it. It's not about being in a relationship versus being single. It's about cultural norms, what we're taught
Mm.
is celebrated, what hierarchy we've internalized from the world, and how we move through it. Right. So I think queer guys, for example, have complicated landscape they have to navigate around relationships.
Mm.
And so it's not about having one, it's how do you manage rejection? How do you think about endings? What does queer love offer you in the way of working through perhaps internalized homophobia? Right. So I'm
Mm.
thinking about it in a
I
more
think
nuanced way, hopefully.
I think what I really love about you and what you're doing in your book is you've kind of blended the sort of social construction, haven't you? Being a social worker as well as a therapist. And I think sometimes one of the criticisms of therapy is it's very much sort of like you're the problem. They see CBT has been criticized as being, it's sort of been
Yes.
designed for sort of well middle class people and who are very articulate and all that kind of thing. But I think what you get into is much more of a broader perspective, and you integrate that into the cultural norms that you hear and the messages that you internalize. um, it's much more of the problem than
Hmm.
actually just having negative thoughts, and I think that's a really
Yeah.
good way of viewing things,
Mhm.
the way you've done that. Mm.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, um, if you don't have an understanding of someone's subculture, the things that drive their wants, their needs, their comparison and reference points, you might use an inappropriate intervention tool. So you really have to
Mm.
understand where someone's coming from in their reality before you decide, do I do CBT thought records or do I do CBT problem solving, right?
Mm.
The thought record assumes you have an unhelpful thinking style. The problem solving recognizes that you have to make a decision under constraints and there's thoughts and feelings involved. And so we're going to introduce a linear process to move through it. Those are different things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I read something about, rejection, and the person might have a great fear of being rejected. This is something from your book.
Yeah.
Um, but the reason they've got a great fear of being rejected is they've had a lot of rejection in their lives. So it's actually sort of quite true, isn't it? And then it's how you handle
Mm.
it. It's not that whether you'll be rejected or not. The problem is it has a lot of experience. That person has internalized that rejection. Um, but I love the way you cover that in your book, don't you? Uh,
Yeah, thank you for that.
yeah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to rejection, um, I know lots of people experience it, right? Because we're on dating apps and
Mm.
we're in a time where people are going to have many more casual partners, parallel relationships, or even you're more likely to be a serial monogamous now than you would 50 or 70 years ago. And so in general, everyone's dealing with more rejection and everyone's on dating apps. So you have to get used to the norms of that. And it can be awful for everybody. The point I kind of make in the book is, as you said, how, like, ask yourself how it lands with you when you experience rejection, because it could be tied to an earlier schema of anticipating rejection, that came at an early age. And how do you mobilize your resources and how, for to prepare for that? And if you were anticipating rejection at a young age because of your queerness, how has that informed your attachment style that you
Mm.
then carry into
Yes.
present day relationships,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
just thinking about some of that, and then we can move ahead and say, okay, now that we know a bit about you and where it comes from, we can do a Gestalt therapy exercise. We can do a thought record. We can see what it is we want to dig into more.
Yes, and I loved your blend of therapy styles as well. So you've got um you got I can't name them all, but the ones I know is CBT, you've got psychodynamic, but you've got the empty chair, you've got the Gestalt work, which
Yeah.
I'm a drama therapist, so we love an empty chair.
Yes. Yes.
But you explain the exercise really well about how it can help you and everything like that, so that somebody can do it on their own. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, right? And you know this as if you do psychodrama, we sometimes wonder how will people do it on their own? Like, do they understand the concepts of like surplus reality, the telly? In Gestalt, it is the embodiment, what the objective of the process is. And I think there's so many people doing um like social media type therapy out there.
Mm,
Like they're giving tidbits that can be useful, and then there's people consuming it and figuring out if they can apply it to their lives or not. I thought what has been reserved for um, the long-term relationship maybe needs to be democratized and made a little bit less sacred. We need to just put it in a
mm,
book and see how it goes. So, if somebody were to do an empty chair exercise, I don't know that it would always feel completely safe. You could feel a bit
mm.
dysregulated, but I think I've come to a place of thinking about like people as consumers that we have to trust. And I try to say throughout, like, if it brings up emotions, talk to a therapist, talk to a trusted friend,
Yeah.
like that, or journal about it. And I think
Mm,
that's the best we can do. But for me, I really do want to bring the ideas of Gestalt into I want to make it more accessible, as much as one can. And so each chapter ends with an empty chair exercise where I'm like, okay, talk to an ancestor, or now you're talking to your childhood self, or you're talking to a part of your body, or you're talking to your childhood bully. And so, and I try, I mean, I don't do, it's not the whole Gestalt toolbox. It's one
mm.
tool that even lots of therapists don't even use nowadays because they
Yeah.
focus more on the relational aspect, but I think it's a concrete thing that can be scripted and packaged so that people can try it and see what comes
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. And just so the audience, people might not know what Gestalt is. Are you able just to sort of just briefly explain it, Rahim, if people
Yeah,
don't know what the word is? Because I'm aware it could be a jargony word.
yeah, yeah. So in German, Gestalt means contact or contact cycle. Gestalt therapy is the underlying idea is that we're always reaching for something to fulfill a need. Could be physical, emotional, sensory, and our life and our experience is made up of small cycles and big cycles. Um, and so, in that contact cycle, when we reach to fill a need, there are things that can interrupt us and they get in the way. So the cycle doesn't get completed. And Gestalt wants to look at what those things are that interfere. Is it a should that you've internalized? Is it a kind of energy that's gotten stifled? Is it they wouldn't say a core belief, but it's like a core belief that's more embodied,
Mm,
that makes you behave a certain way. And it's about sitting with that experience to say, how does it feel when I try to do something different? Um,
mm,
so I don't know, maybe that is abstract. I think another way I could describe it is uh, working with unfinished business. So
mm,
having conversations and taking yourself to a headspace, like an experience that you wouldn't otherwise have in your everyday life, to see how it can shift something inside you.
mm.
Actually, let's keep that second description is probably better.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something about completing the cycle, isn't it? Sometimes the cycle gets interrupted and it keeps coming again, and then you work through the cycle, and then that you sort of move on as well. It's that sort of completeness. And I think what you're describing in your book is ways where you can kind of deal with unresolved issues. So, say somebody you really disliked and was horrible to you as a child,
Mm,
you never get a chance to say how you feel about that person because maybe you're not in touch or they've died or anything like that. So an
yeah.
empty chair is you can talk to that person and let all those, anger and frustration and unresolved conflict, you let it out as if you were talking to that person.
Yeah.
So you free yourself of all that sort of
Absolutely.
stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can also, what I try to do when I do Gestalt therapy with clients, if they're talking to another person, I I also say, ask like, tell the empty chair what this experience left you with. How did it shift
Mm.
how you think about yourself and the world?
Mm.
And how does that person, their memory or the experience show up in your present day? And then I shifted and I would say, like, you've named this, let's give a name to this experience. Like, let's say my bully was Joe. And now I'm not talking to Joe, but I'm talking about what Joe left me with. Let's name it as the Joe cloud. Right. So we're shifting gears. I want you to talk to the cloud because Joe's not actually there. It's the cloud that's left. Tell him
Mm.
how he's served you because his memory, like the cloud is actually protecting you from meeting another Joe, but it's also getting in the way. So tell it when it can loosen its grip. Tell
Mm.
Joe Cloud how to leave you alone and when and what you're going to do in its place. So you really get to think
Love
about
it.
like, oh, what
Oh, yeah.
yes, yes. Sorry, those weren't
Oh,
words, but
great.
I
Yeah.
think that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
experience you have. It's oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we got something to call you Gestalt you because you've just sort of like, love Gestalt, love the work. And I think it's sort of, it's been put aside a little bit really because it is a really great therapy. And it is a real kind of experiential therapy, isn't it?
Yes,
This sort of whole body experience, isn't it? And that's another great thing about Gestalt. It's not just about your thinking and that, it's about your whole experience, isn't it? And how you feel and how you think and how you express yourself.
yeah. I think I do wish it was taught a little bit more because I think, for example, like social work programs, I teach in a social work program and I love social work. It's my whole professional identity. And I think social work tells us a lot about how to see the client, how to understand them in their environment, how to like the importance and value of normalizing and validating. And I think Gestalt actually gives you the play by play, the minute to minute skills for what that can look like. Of course, there's other things people can do, but solution focused therapy,
Yeah.
motivational interviewing, blah blah blah. But I'm just saying that I think uh, it could be taught a little bit more. I think it could have more presence. Instead, I think it's written off sometimes as people thinking it's not evidence based, but I think we're not measuring the right things. We're measuring symptom reduction as opposed to quality of relational experience.
That's another great example of where, what you look at or what you measure in therapy, isn't it? And CBT, great measuring mood and symptoms, everything like that. But,
Yes,
not so much the whole feeling or how you feel and everything like that. Yeah,
totally. When I
yeah.
did with clients, I've asked them what in our time together, we've spent a year together, we've spent 2 years together, we've spent 5 years together, or even 6 months. Like a lot has happened in your life. And I just, as we, you know, plan our departure, I really want to know, what are you taking with you? Like, what stands out to you?
Yeah.
What is memorable? And people always, almost always, will say they'll name a Gestalt exercise I did with them.
Mm.
So it could be empty
Yeah.
chair. It could be about working with polarities, which is similar to
Mm.
internal family systems. Um, it just feels so memorable, and to me, that
Mm.
that speaks to impact. That's
Yeah.
practice-based evidence, right? Um, the CBT thought records I do with clients, they remember those, but I think what they appreciate about them is it's something linear and it's something written that they can take away. So
Mm.
it's not that it's helpful,
Yeah.
um, but it also fulfills a need of like, I've done the work, I've done my homework, right?
Daily
Um,
homework.
from a Gestalt perspective, you might even your goal might be to break away from thinking about achievement in that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's great. So I'm going to move on now to
Yes.
survival strategies because how you describe in the book is that you say they become emotional patterns. So perhaps you can give some examples of some adaptations queer people develop early in life that are celebrated socially, but also can create loneliness and disconnection in adulthood.
Yeah. So these adaptations is I'm borrowing the concept from Gestalt therapy, which is the creative adjustment. It's what keeps you safe. It helps you connect. It meets your need at a particular time. It can continue to serve you in part, but it can also be limiting later in life. So anything can be a creative adjustment. When I think about queer guys in particular, um, you know, I'm thinking about how masculinity can be monitored and surveilled as an adjustment or an adaptation. We might have focused on hypermasculinity. We might have only associated with other people that present a particular way. We might have demonized femininity. So it could be in other queer guys where we're like, oh, I don't like femme people, or I'm not femme, I'm a man. Or it actually could very well be like sexism and misogyny. Like we relate to other men by borrowing or using, leaning into the ways of thinking of patriarchy, sexist, ways of thinking to reify our position in the world. Um, and so, sure, that's a creative adjustment. Um, it gets in the way, right? It gets in the way of relating to people, true liberation. What's wrapped up in there is self-loathing. Um, uh,
Yeah.
like it has its limits. Another one I think for a lot of queer guys is the culture we've developed around body consciousness and sculpted
Mm,
bodies and emphasis on the gym. I would argue that it's a whole cultural adjustment.
mm,
Collectively, there's a creative adjustment to a number of things. One is pressures around masculinity. So childhood of not fitting in with the guys, we create another hyper masculine culture where it is possible. Um,
mm,
and musculature becomes the signifier of masculinity and strength. Um,
mhm,
I think it's also an adaptation to um, the AIDS epidemic and how people equated sexuality, queerness, illness, and death. Um, and the kind of sculpted body is perhaps an opposition or it plants another image of the gay man in people's minds to
mm,
replace the image of the frail AIDS patient, right?
mm,
Um, the other idea I've had is that because our milestones are different from a lot of our cis and straight counterparts, and we live in a world where relationships look a bit different. We're more likely to be
mm,
non-monogamous. We're seeking and negotiating open relationships. We might be single for longer. We might be single much later into life. We're not following this trajectory of like
mm.
find somebody, settle down, kids, property, like etc.
Yeah.
Some people are, but by and large, as a collective culture, it's not necessarily doesn't look that way. And so I think when we can't participate in the world in the same way our cis and straight counterparts can, right? Like through these milestones, I think some of that energy gets invested in um, youthfulness and our bodies. Now,
Okay.
that's not
Yes. Yeah.
evidence based, that's not tested, that's just a theory I have. It's a kind of,
Mm,
if it were a defense mechanism, It could just be a cultural adaptation. It might not be a whole defense, but if it was a defense mechanism, it might be a kind of compromise formation. Like I I can't have those things you have, but look at this other thing I can focus my energy on.
Mm,
And
mm.
here's what I have to show for um, my life and my time and my energy I put into myself. It's the expression of self love. You are procreating. I am generating muscle mass. So I mean, people listening might disagree with that last one, but it's more food for thought about
Well,
how adaptations happen.
but I like the questions you ask, and I like the challenges you create to sort of to look at things differently. And there's a lovely bit in your book where you say you talk about coming out and coming out to yourself first before you come out, but you changed the phrase and said rather than coming out, inviting in. And I thought that
Yeah.
was really lovely, a lovely way of celebrating. And just those language and those words just make it so
Yeah.
much more accepting, doesn't it?
You know, I think I'm so glad you picked up on that and it stood out to you because I don't know that it stands out to everybody. Many years ago, I was teaching at many years, maybe like 8 years ago, I was teaching at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly called Ryerson University. And it was a BSW course called Transformative Social Work Practice. And we had a whole department at that university that did simulations. And so we had actors come in to play out a family case, and I would coach students to do a role play, and they'd be in like the hot seat,
Lovely.
right? Um, and there was a family um, of mixed heritage, and one of the parents was Indigenous. The other one, I forget what their background was. I think they might have been like Western Europe white, and
Yeah.
um, and the child was coming out, and the parent, like the actor, turns to the child and said, "If you felt this way, why didn't you tell us?" And the young person says, "Well, actually, in our indigenous culture, we talk about inviting in. We don't invite everybody into our ceremony and our ritual if we don't trust them and we don't know them and we don't know that they can be respectful. So I had to wait, and now I'm inviting you in." And that stayed with me for a long
Mm,
time. Now, I don't know if somebody else has invented that term or they're using it in a different way. That was my introduction to it. And so I thought, I think that's a nice reframe as
mm,
opposed to saying, you didn't come out. Well, it must
mm,
mean you don't like yourself, or must mean you're struggling with shame. Maybe that's true. Maybe not.
mm,
I think we
mm.
can widen that. We can be more expansive in how we see that.
And it is answer. I mean, there's a lot of in your book. There's lots of skills and strategies to how to
Mhm.
deal with aspects of mental health for your community,
Mm.
and that's really really good. But I think blended in with that is all these sort of questions as to um, rather than like shame. I think another example you gave was shame, where it was those reasons why people feel shame because it's this
Yes.
internalized community which is maybe
Yes.
not sensitive to queer people and everything like that. So
Mm.
that's so people then carry that around with them, don't they? Was another
Absolutely.
example you gave.
And there's people who are not queer who have read the book or parts of the book, which is also fine. You could just read the parts that feel stand out to you, and it's resonated with them, right? So I think that's great because I think we all have shame. You're thinking about how you've internalized messages about yourself from the world that
Yeah.
are negative, unhelpful, and they make you evaluate yourself negatively through somebody else's
Mm,
perspective or gaze. So so lots of people will think, oh, I don't have shame. I'm like, well, you need to go to therapy yesterday because we all have it. And so we have all got it, right? You if you don't feel like you deal with shame, maybe you need a more precise question, which is, what are some of the few contexts, people, places, situations, times of the year where your shame still does get activated? Maybe
yeah.
it needs to be more specific about
Yeah.
where it gets activated context wise.
Mm,
Um, because it shows up and it makes us act in all kinds of ways, right? Defensive ways. Um,
But it's that limiting again, isn't it? I think
mm,
it's the fear of being shamed, isn't it? So you don't live your life to the full. You know, you limit and you withdraw or you avoid
yes.
the threat of being shamed, isn't it, as well? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, good question. Um, so within queer communities themselves, there sometimes can be pressure around desirability,
Mm.
confidence, openness, political correctness, or sexual expression. Yeah. So what are some of the subcultural norms people struggle with, perhaps privately, but very rarely talk about openly,
Yeah.
Rahim?
Well, I've mentioned body image. Um,
Yeah.
so that's on the list. I think another one is as a therapist, I talk about coming out and people can be at different places and not coming out doesn't mean you have internalized shame. However, it does impact dating and connection seeking, because some people will look for a relationship because they think or they hope it'll provide the safety and the foundational support that will support them in coming out to other people. That may or may not be true,
Mm,
and that might feel like a lot of pressure for somebody else. So whether somebody is out or not can influence their dating prospects. Um, and then I think substance use is another part of our culture. Now I know everybody, drinks and does recreational drugs, and they can be. Some people have a difficult time with them. They can be great for other people. I think um, for a lot of queer people who don't necessarily follow the milestones and the trajectory of straight life, um, they're out at the bars for a longer period of time. You know, it's not just a thing you do during uni and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna meet somebody and settle down, and we don't do that
mm,
anymore. And now we drive our kids to all the things. No, like the bar becomes an important social institution. It's where you see art and culture. It's where you meet the drag queens. It's how you build community. It's um how you get visibility. It's where dating and connection and casual sex happens. Well, where you find somebody. And even though apps have replaced some of that or become a substitute for some of it, that social connection scene is big for us. And bars and bathhouses, saunas, where guys go to have anonymous sex, um, those are important sites for like HIV prevention, sexual health information, test access to testing. Um, all that to say, the bar, the drag performance, these things, the sauna, these are social institutions that socialize us. They become important for our connection and community, but they socialize us. And so we're just going to be more likely to consume more alcohol and recreational drugs over our lives because we're at these establishments more. Um, I think another challenge that can emerge for people
mm,
is if they pair drug and alcohol use with sexual experiences,
mm,
because it can enhance your experience, but it can
mm,
also become a difficult pairing where if you were to try to abstain or reduce, you might start to feel like anxiety shows up, um, fear, performance difficulty, all kinds of things can show up. So I think that as with anybody, if you use substances for a period of time, your relationship to it changes. I think for queer guys who might pair it with sex or see substances as the way to have fun and make friends and build community, there just might be a higher vulnerability, right, to a difficult relationship to those substances. We also have an entire like a subculture within the subculture of party and play, or what is called chemsex in the UK, which is intentionally saying, I like to party, I like to pair GHB or methadone or methamphetamine with sex. Um, and that becomes its own subculture that then comes
mm,
with stigma for using like harder drugs, quote unquote. Um, and some of those substances can be quite addictive. So some people are able to do it in moderation, whereas other people are using a strong substance that makes them feel really great. And then when they feel really bad, when you have a crash, what often comes up is um, unresolved trauma. Oops,
Mm,
unresolved trauma from an earlier time.
mm,
Things to do with family, things to do with abuse, things to do with rejection. Sometimes for people, their experience around seroconversion, so testing positive for HIV.
mm,
All of those things we think we've dealt with and are not a problem during the lows of substance use, they can come to the
mm.
surface, right?
Yeah.
So I think those
Wonderful.
are some of the ways I think our subculture has unique challenges. One thing I will mention about uh, trans people, trans experience, trans guys, um, regardless of where you are in the world, there is a lack of trans affirming services. Even if they exist, even if the law supports you, to access them is a bit of a labyrinth, right?
Mm,
Um, Now, not to, so here in the US, it's particularly bad at the moment, but in even coming from Canada, where it's accessible and it's enshrined in all kinds of legislation, the pathway to navigate is difficult with
mm,
assessments, readiness, uh, securing the funding, being in the optimal health to get top surgery or lower surgery. Um, all of that stuff takes time. Even
mm,
when you get coverage, it costs money. And so for a lot of trans people, the rate of suicidality is high. And in
mm,
particular, some of the research shows that um, suicidality peaks. So not necessarily, I can't say for sure, intent and plan rises at the same degree, but the ideation increases in the period between approval for gender affirming care and surgeries and the actual implementation or of the procedure.
mm.
And so that's tough. That's really
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like I've had some trans folks in my practice, actually both trans women and trans men, who lament, they grieve, um, and the grief shows up in anger sometimes about the ways in which figuring out gender affirming care is so central in their lives, but that it takes away from being able to do other things.
Mm,
Um, and the anger is like, how come I have to deal with this? And how come other people don't have to think about this? Right? They don't have to think about being misgendered or how their body looks or do they have enough facial hair or uh, do they need to shave? Do they, uh, all
it's a
kinds of
lot.
things that people are thinking about that influences, it severely impacts or impairs their ability to participate optimally in the world they want to live in. Um, and so I think all of those things can be quite challenging. Um,
Yeah.
One final thing I'll say that I think is also true across cultural contexts, even when you have good laws, when you have bad laws, depending on your family, your income and access to resources, the flexibility of the religious community you're from, these things really influence the family, the support you might get, right? So um, some people will come out
Mm,
and they might come from a wealthy family that could afford family therapy, that could afford
yeah.
resources, but
Mhm,
they also have a really strict religious orthodox interpretation
mhm,
of what this means. And so the young person is cut off from all support, right? And then there's other families where there might not be the same resources or means, but there's a much more flexible approach and understanding to religion um, or cultural norms. And that person might not be having a great experience in their family of origin, but they're not being disowned,
mm,
So youth homelessness is a big problem. Like LGBTQ youth are overrepresented in youth homelessness in North America, at least. I imagine it's similar in the UK.
mm,
We're not really where we need to be in terms of public education. Um, and really thinking about what does acceptance look like if somebody is queer or trans in your family, not just your friends or whomever's.
Mm. It's a lot to think about, isn't it? It's so much thing. You've got the actual changes of all the body and all the hormones, everything like that, but you've got the psychological impact of all that as well, and the dilemmas and the thought processes and the
Mhm.
confusion, and I don't think there's in the research that I've done, I didn't think there's much literature at all about trans people at all, and that's why I
Mhm.
thought your book was so very much needed, because of I was so surprised at the lack of information there was out there. I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm sure you know I'm sure there is some stuff there, but it was you could buy 10,000 books on anxiety, but trying to find a book on therapy for trans, maybe queer
Absolutely.
queer might be a bit better, but there was just nothing really.
There's
So
not very much out there. I think
no,
there could be
no,
a
I
whole book
noticed.
on the sorry, yeah, I think there could be a whole book on the trans experience and some of the
Yeah,
unique determinants, right? Because I talk about navigating healthcare as the determinant, and I talk about aging and being trans as like
yes,
populations that might
yeah.
but that's not the whole story. There's much more,
Mm.
so yeah, that could
Another
be a
book.
whole book on itself. Yeah.
Another book. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
And
maybe not by me though. Someone from the community maybe can.
well, sometimes it's good to collaborate as well. I think that's the
Yeah,
other,
that's true.
idea. Yeah. Okay. So, you touch on the idea that belonging, you say, is complicated, and I
Mm,
get that totally. I get what you're saying. Even spaces that maybe should be liberating can still produce exclusion around race, body image,
mhm.
masculinity, class, HIV status, gender expression, or relationship style. So you've covered this a little bit already, Rahim, but I'm just wondering, how can you perhaps give some practical skills about people navigating, wanting connection, especially when they don't feel seen in a community? Perhaps could you just
Yeah.
sort of like give some examples from your book, if you're okay to do that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I come back to is let's take a moment to think about who it is you're seeking connection with
Hmm. Okay.
for friendship, for romantic partnership, for casual encounters, and that the archetype or the models of that person, what do they symbolize to you? And you ask this question not because this is not like what are your preferences that you would put on in a dating app. What are you actually drawn to? And then let's do a critical interrogation of how power fits into that erotic template or into that desire um, uh, template. And are you attracted to people or are you seeking people that you see as having more power than you or being more
Mm,
celebrated in the world? If the answer is yes, you don't have to stop, but think about what hierarchy you've internalized, right?
mm,
So if you're racialized and you're looking for white folks, um, you can do that and you can meet
mm,
somebody who, like that is loving and caring and not, but think about what it represents and what does it mean to you to be with this kind of person or that kind of person, a fat
mm,
person, a person with HIV. And think about those markers of power and how they might not serve you because they could actually be getting in the way of pleasure, you authentically being yourself. um they could get in the way of community building. You might seek proximity to people who you think
mm,
are amazing, um but they don't understand you necessarily, and so you don't get a sense of belonging or feeling seen.
mm,
um and so I would say we really need to think about that. And the other thing
mm.
that I mention is um, I make a connection between our early experiences of rejection, internalized hierarchies of power that exist in the world
Yeah.
and in our community.
Hmm.
And so what happens when I seek proximity to somebody who I think represents
Mm,
power? I feel anxious. What do we do with that anxiety? We sexualize it. So
mm,
you can sexualize unavailability, or the anxiety that comes from unavailability, and we chase the thing um, that might hurt us. And I think we need to just take a moment and say, like, should I keep chasing that? How bad is it making me feel? Either I can reframe how I feel when it doesn't work out, like you win some, you lose some, it's not personal,
mm,
or I maybe need to take an approach to saying, like, I need to think about how I think about power, proximity to specific kinds of people, and I need to dismantle what I think joy is. I need to think about connection and not upward social mobility. I need to think
mm,
about being seen, and like being seen in like in an authentic way, and um, not necessarily feeling like I'm associated with a cool group of people. You know, those are different things. And so I think there's a lot of work to do in all of that.
mm.
Um, and
And
it's not easy work.
do you think it's more intensified in your community as well? Do you think all those things about, maybe because the way you've been treated as younger and there was prejudice or bias that that person maybe seek more in those relationships and power because of their experience?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think
Hmm.
it's okay. It's very possible that um, you've avoided rejection your whole life by curating a version of yourself that'll be palatable to the
Yep.
straight world. And to maintain that,
Mm,
you say and do things that are harmful to your own community.
mm,
Um, it also is possible that you uh, are living in a time where, like, if you're not out right now, or you're figuring out things about your identity in this moment that
mm,
other people have done in the past, in this political moment, actually, um where queer people are being villainized, trans people are being attacked,
mm,
it seems to be across the board, in the global north at least. um the impact of being villainized politically is going to have a huge impact on our
yeah.
communities, because people are going to look for a little bit of power, and
Mm,
when they can taste it, they're going to want to hold on to it.
mm,
And it's harder to help other people. It's harder to build community. It's and it's easier to feel like you just rely on yourself and you just stick to your own thing, when visibility is dangerous,
mm.
right?
And
When
scary even. It's
Yeah,
scary, isn't it? That's
it
the
is.
thing. It could be a
Yeah.
survival instinct which can really make people feel, absolute opposite of belonging, like you say, but people go back into themselves or hide or withdraw. The shame gets greater again, and mental health problems probably would
Yeah.
accompany that. Yeah,
Yes,
because of, yeah,
absolutely. And I
I
think
get that.
there are people who they built an identity around wanting to be gay in a way that has lots of proximity to heterosexual values,
Yes.
heterosexual lifestyle, heterosexual ideas, without seeing that as
Mm,
a cultural product itself.
mm,
Um, and so, there'll be some queer people or gay people who want, they're like, I just want a relationship that's monogamous, and I want to get married, and I want to have
mm,
kids, and I want, and that can be fine. But
mm,
if you're seeking that in a way that comes with a hierarchy of, like, that's the best way to be, and
mm.
these
I
other people
understand.
are degenerates, they're deviants, they
Yeah.
give us a bad name, um, you're not looking for, like, your desire, your whole life is not, it's not about proximity to power within the community, it's proximity to power to a dominant culture that probably doesn't, it's not going to fight for your rights at the end of the day necessarily, or protect them. So it's to your own detriment.
And also, Rahim, there's certain cultures where, gay is illegal,
Mm,
and so it, that is already there, isn't it? There's, the chance of actually expressing any of that must really go into a very subculture with lots of fear and shame and blame and everything like that. There are
yeah,
uh, countries who still are very backward thinking around the whole
yes,
whole topic, aren't they? So
they
that's
are. I
so
would
hard.
I would challenge that idea a little bit though, because I think access to education and class background has a big impact. Like, we think about America and the UK and Canada as progressive. That's because we've got laws that protect queer and trans people, but there's lots of trans people being murdered every year.
Yeah,
There's lots of
yeah,
gay people that aren't out, whereas I know in uh, parts of Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, like parts of Asia, um, there's subculture, yes, vibrant often, but also, I've known people in some of these places where like they're out to their family and they're kind of
mm,
okay. Like, but
mm,
it's not this, there's norms about how visible it can be, of
yeah,
course, but they're kind of okay. Like class protects them
mm,
in a way. Like I have a friend who lives in Saudi Arabia and
yeah,
with his partner, and they're out to their family and they're fine.
yeah.
Same with
Interesting.
Tanzania, same with Singapore. Like there's places where, and I'm not saying everyone's having a good experience there, more so that I think both, I think legislation has a role, and then I think cultural capital, whether it's money or who you associate with or status or mobility, it has a big influence on your sense of safety and your experience of acceptance.
Mm, yeah. It's a good discussion to have, isn't it?
Yeah,
And how that politicization or laws, what you're saying is
yeah,
they should protect people, but it still doesn't. There's still lots of,
absolutely,
like you say, terrible atrocities happening just because a person's trans or gay or whatever. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah. Okay. Um, and another sort of more therapy point,
yeah.
Rahim, is um, you actually describe personal healing. It's not about being fixed or suddenly you wake up and you're all confident. It's much more what you say is it's much more about being honest, more integrated, more
Mhm.
relational. So what does emotional wellness look like to you for queer and trans people?
Well, look, I think for lots of people, it could be if you're experiencing a lot of anxiety and depression, like run of the mill anxiety and depression, it could be about symptom reduction. What are the concrete skills and tools I can try in my environment to feel better, participate more? Um, for other folks, it can be practical. How do I get connected to places, groups, communities where I see myself reflected? I can feel honored. I can feel belonging where there's connection and I can evolve and grow and explore myself. Um, I think just therapeutically, I would say that those concrete things are important, but being able to creating a space to talk about what's difficult, to talk about your fears of rejection, of not being enough, to explore your shame, to have awareness about some of these issues and know where they show up in your life, and to be in touch with the emotional experience, to me is healing,
Mm,
right? Because I think, especially for queer guys, where we understand we've been socialized to think about masculinity as
mm.
turning off emotions, avoidance and appearing to be pragmatic or logical is really revered. It's like the way it's the like,
So true.
yeah. And that's like, you might operate well in the world, but have you healed? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think allowing yourself to be tender and to say, actually, I'm not logical and pragmatic. I am shut down emotionally. And so I go to a cognitive place. What would it look like if I could actually be in touch with the feelings? because shutting down was a creative adjustment. It was an adaptation to an environment.
Yeah.
So if I were to pay attention to emotions, if I could name them, if I could connect those to unmet needs, or if I could sit with them and grieve things that I'm not, or that I won't be, or that I can't have, I would say that is much more aligned with how I understand healing. Um, and it's creating space to do some of that. It could be
Mm.
conversations with friends. It could be uh, um, it could be sessions with a therapist. Um, it can look like many different things, you know?
Mm. I think your book is a great toolkit for people to question and think more about working trans and gay people. And I think it applies to people for a self-help book. I think it was designed, but I think it's a very good resource for therapists as well, actually,
So yeah,
can use can enhance the book or take some chapters out or whatever as well. So um, yeah, because
yeah,
there's lots of different skills in there as well, which the therapist
absolutely.
can look at as well.
So I would say, you know, for therapists, if it's helpful, if you want, there are a slew of free worksheets connected to this
Ah,
book
yeah,
and the
yeah,
determinants. They're all available on my website. So if you go to thepoliticizedpractitioner.com, there's a section for free downloads. Um, and if you're feeling cheeky, there's also a store with fun merch that you can consider. Um, uh, but
that sounds interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm very curious now,
have
Rahim.
a look, have a look, have a gander, if you will. Um,
Okay, interesting.
yeah, so I encourage people to check that out because I think it could be helpful. And again, free downloads, you know, like I really want to
Yeah,
get tools out there. I really want to democratize
yeah,
therapy. I want people to think about
yeah.
how some of these issues and determinants apply to their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have that bigger awareness because I think if you don't, if the therapist, sorry, I need to make this point, talks about, limits of therapy to talk about, oh, it's your beliefs and your behaviors and like that, without looking at the wider context. I'm not saying therapists do, but I think you really do bring
I
in the
think some of
wider
them do.
context. Well, I was being kind. Uh,
Yes.
even this, I know it's old Freud psychoanalytic, but it's all about the mum, isn't it? Uh, there's wider implications going on. So
Yes, yes.
yeah. Okay. So Rahim, thank you so much for being an amazing guest and very entertaining and very informative as well. So it's been great having you as a guest on my show. I just want to mention that the resources will be available in the show notes, so people can actually go and click on and order the book, and also go onto your website and download those resources. And that's very generous of you as well. And to all those people who are listening, thank you so much for listening, and please subscribe to the channel because I have great guests like Rahim, and I hope you really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Rahim.
Thank you, Wendy.